you so much. That was a great introduction. That's the kind of, you just kind of want to sit down and not mess it up. Just don't read anything and just remember what he said, and thank you very much. We'll see you later. So I thought I'd read just one story. Some of the students that I met today in David's class had read my book, Pastoralia, and in that book there's a couple stories, three I think actually, that are done in what I think of as third-person ventriloquist, which is where it's third person, and then slowly you kind of sink into the protagonist's mindset and even start using his diction and stuff. So in that book, there was one, the story that David mentioned, The Falls, had two voices in it. This one has three people. And I guess I should explain, I think on the page it's kind of self-explanatory, but maybe out loud it might be confusing. The first two scenes, one is a 15-year-old girl in her house, and the next scene, the second one, is a 15-year-old boy in his house right next door. And in both cases, even though it'll sound otherwise, they're alone. So there's a lot of internal voices in their heads going on. And also there's some French, which I'll butcher, and that's kind of, I think these are dance terms. So when you hear those, you can imagine this girl kind of doing that dance. So also, my stories are a little dark, but they're also hopefully a little funny, which is awkward because sometimes you come to a room full of strangers and they don't want to be rude. So feel free to laugh. If you don't want to, I have another thing. This is like a 35-minute read, but over here in my bag I have a slightly longer thing that has no laughs. So it's 4 hours, but it's about legumes. It's a study of the legumes. So if you feel like laughing, great. I'll do the half-hour thing. Otherwise, we'll go with the 4 hours of legumes. It's up to you, really. It's your choice. All right. Okay, this is called Victory Lap. 3 days shy of her 15th birthday, Allison paused at the top of the stairs. Say the staircase was marble. Say she descended and all heads turned. Where was Special One? Approaching now, bowing slightly, he exclaimed, "How can so much grace be contained in one small package?" Oops. Had he said small package? And just stood there? Broad, prince-like face, totally bland of expression. Poor thing. Sorry, no way. Down he went. He was definitely not Special One. What about this guy behind Mr. Small Package? Standing near the home entertainment center, with a thick neck of farmer integrity, yet tender, ample lips, who, placing one hand on the small of her back, whispered, "Dreadfully sorry you had to endure that bit about the small package just now. Let us go stand on the moon, in the moonlight." Had he said, "Let us go stand on the moon"? If so, she would have to be like, and if no wry acknowledgement was forthcoming, be like, "I'm not exactly dressed for standing on the moon, because I understand it is super cold." Come on, guys, she couldn't keep treading gracefully on this marble staircase in her mind forever. That dear old white hair in the tiara was getting all like, "Why are those supposed princes making that darling girl march in place ad nausea?" Plus she had a recital tonight and had to go fetch her tights from the dryer. Egads, one found oneself still standing at the top of the stairs. Do the thing where, facing upstairs, hand on railing, you hop down the stairs one at a time, which is getting a lot harder lately due to someone's feet were getting longer every day, seemed like. Pas de chat, changement. Hop over thin metal thingy separating hallway tile from living room rug. Curtsy to self an entryway mirror. Come on, Mom, get here. We do not wish to be castigated by Ms. Callow again in the wings. Actually, although she loved Miss Callow, so strict. Also loved the other girls in class and the girls from school. Loved them. Everyone was so nice. Plus the boys at her school, plus the teachers at her school, all of them were doing their best. Actually, she loved her whole town. That adorable grocer spraying his lettuce. Pastor Carol with her large, comfortable butt. The chubby postman gesticulating with his padded envelopes. It had once been a mill town. Wasn't that crazy? What did that even mean? Also, she loved her house. Across the creek was the Russian church. So ethnic. That onion dome had loomed in her window since her Pooh footy days. Also, loved Gladsong Drive. Every house on Gladsong was a Corona Del Mar. That was amazing. If you had a friend on Gladsong, you already knew where everything was in his or her home. J'étais rond de jambe, pas de bourrée. On a happy whim, do front roll, hop to your feet, kiss the picture of Mom and Dad, taken at pennies, back in the Stone Ages, when you were that little cutie right there, kiss. With a hair bow bigger than all outdoors. Sometimes, feeling happy like this, she imagined a baby deer trembling in the woods. "Where's your mom, little guy?" "I don't know," the deer said in the voice of Heather's little sister, Becca. "Are you afraid?" she asked it. "Are you hungry? Do you want me to hold you?" "Okay." Here came the hunter now, dragging the deer's mother by the antlers. Her guts were completely splayed. Geez, that was nice. She covered the baby's eyes and was like, "Don't you have anything better to do, dank hunter, than kill this baby's mom? You seem like a nice enough guy." "Is my mom killed?" the baby said in Becca's voice. No, she said. "This gentleman was just leaving." Then the hunter, captivated by her beauty, doffed his cap, and going down on one knee said, "If I could will life back into this fawn, I would do so, in hopes you might defer one tender kiss upon our elderly forehead." "Go," she said, "only for your task of penance. Do not eat her. Lay her out in a field of clover, with roses strewn about her, and bestow a choir to softly sing of her foul end." "Lay who out?" the baby deer said. "No one," she said. "Never mind. Stop asking so many questions." Padishah, changement. She felt hopeful that special one would hail from far away. The local boys possessed a certain je ne sais quoi, which, to tell the truth, she was not très crazy about, such as actually name their own nuts. No, she had overheard that. And they aspired to work for county power because the work shirts were awesome and you got them free. So ixnay on the local boys. Special ixnay on Matt Dre, owner of the largest mouth in the land. Kissing him last night at the pep rally had been like kissing an underpass. Scary. Kissing Matt was like suddenly this cow in his sweater is bearing down on you, who will not take no for an answer, and his huge cow head is being flooded by chemicals that are drowning out what little powers of reason Matt actually did have. What she liked was being in charge of her body, her mind, her thoughts, her career, her future. That was what she liked. So be it. We might have a slight snack. Un petit repas. Was she special? Did she consider herself special? Oh gosh, she didn't know. In the history of the world, many had been more special than her. Helen Keller had been awesome. Mother Teresa was amazing. Mrs. Roosevelt was quite chipper, in spite of her husband, who was handicapped. Which, in addition, she had been gay, with those big old teeth. Long before such time as being gay and First Lady was even conceptual, she, Allison, could not hope to compete in the category of those ladies. Not yet, anyway. There was so much she didn't know, like how to change the oil, or even check the oil, how to open the hood, how to bake brownies. That was embarrassing, actually, being a girl and all. And what was a mortgage? Did it come with a house? When you breastfed, did you have to, like, push the milk out? Egads, who was this wan figure visible through the living room window trotting up Gladsong Drive? Kyle Boot? Palest kid in all the land? Still dressed in his weird cross-country running toggles? Poor thing. He looked like a skeleton with a mullet. Were those cross-country shorts from the, like, Charlie's Angels days or quoi? How could he run so well when he seemed to have literally no muscles? Every day he ran home like this, shirtless, with his backpack on, then hit the remote from down by the fungs and scooted into his garage without breaking stride. You almost had to admire the poor goof. They'd grown up together, been little beaners in that mutual sandbox down by the creek. Hadn't they bathed together when we or some such crud? Ugh, she hoped that never got out. Because in terms of friends, Kyle was basically down to Tasso Slavko, who walked leaning way backward and was always retrieving things from between his teeth, announcing the name of the retrieved thing in Greek, then re-eating it. And Kyle's mom and dad didn't let him do squat. He had to call home if the movie in World Culture might show bare boobs. Each of the items in his lunchbox was clearly labeled pas de bourrée and curtsy. Pour quantity of cheese doodles into compartmentalized old school Tupperware dealie. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Your kitchen rocks. Shake Tupperware dealie back and forth like panning for gold. Then offer to some imaginary poor gathered around. Please enjoy. Is there anything else I can do for you folks? You've done enough, Allison, by even deigning to speak to us. That is so not true. Don't you understand? All people deserve respect. Each of us is a rainbow. Really? Look at this big open sore on my poor shriveled flank. Allow me to fetch you some Vaseline. That would be much appreciated. This thing kills. But as far as that rainbow idea, she believed that. People were amazing. Mom was awesome. Dad was awesome. Her teachers worked so hard and had kids of their own, and some were even getting divorced, such as Mrs. D's, but still always took time for their students. What she found especially inspiring about Mrs. D's was that even though Mr. D's was cheating on Mrs. D's with the lady who ran the bowling alley, Mrs. D's was still teaching the best course ever in ethics. Posing such questions as, can goodness win? Or do good people always get shafted? Evil being so reckless. That last bit seemed to be Mrs. D's taking a shot at the bowling alley gal, but seriously, is life fun or scary? Are people good or bad? On the one hand, that clip of those gauntish pale bodies being steamrolled while fat German ladies looked on chomping gum. On the other hand, sometimes rural folks, even if their particular farms were on hills, stayed up late filling sandbags. In their straw poll, she voted for people being good and life being fun, with Mrs. D's giving her a pitying glance as she stated her views. To do good, you just have to decide to do good. You have to be brave. You have to stand up for what's right. At that last one, Mrs. D's had made this kind of groan, which is fine. Mrs. D's had a lot of pain in her life, yet interestingly, still obviously found something fun about life and good about people. Because otherwise, why sometimes stay up so late grading? You come in the next day all exhausted, blouse on backward, having messed it up in the early morning dark, you dear discombobulated thing. Here came a knock on the door, back door. Interesting. Who could it be? Father Dimitri from across the way? UPS? FedEx? With un petit chèque pour papa? J'étais rond de jambe, pas de boré. Open door, and here's a man she did not know. Quite huge fellow in one of those meter reader vests. Something told her to step back in, slam the door, but that seemed rude. Instead, she froze, smiled, did eyebrow raise to indicate, may I help you? Excuse me. Next door, Kyle Boot dashed through the garage into the living area where the big clock-like wooden indicator was set at all out. Other choices included mom and dad out, mom out, dad out, Kyle out, mom and Kyle out, dad and Kyle out, and all in. Why did they even need all in? Wouldn't they know it when they were all in? Would he like to ask dad that? Who in his excellent, totally silent downstairs workshop had designed and built the family status indicator? No way. On the kitchen island was a work notice from dad. All scout, new geode on deck, place in yard per included drawing. No goofing, rake area first, put down plastic as I've shown you, then lay in white rock. This geode expensive. Please take seriously. No reason this should not be done by time I get home. This equal 5 work points. God, Dad, do you honestly feel it fair that I should have to slave in the yard until dark? After a rigorous cross-country practice that included 16 440s, 8 880s, a mile for time, a cajillion Drake sprints, and a 5-mile Indian relay? Shoes off, mister. Yoink's too late. He was already at the TV. And it left an incriminating trail of microclods, wave boating. Could the microclods be hand-plucked up? Although problem, if he went back to hand-pluck the microclods, he'd leave an incriminating new trail of microclods. He took off his shoes and stood mentally rehearsing a little show he liked to call, What If Right Now? What if they came home right now? It's a funny story, Dad. I came in thoughtlessly, then realized what I'd done. I guess when I think about it, what I'm happy about is how quickly I self-corrected. The reason I came in so thoughtlessly was I wanted to get right to work, Dad, per your note. He raced in his socks to the garage, threw his shoes into the garage, ran for the vacuum, vacuumed up the microclods, and realized, holy golly, he'd thrown his shoes into the garage rather than placing them on the shoe sheet, as required. Toes facing away from the door for ease of dunnage later. He stepped into the garage, placed his shoes on the shoe sheet, stepped back inside. Scout, Dad said in his head, has anyone ever told you that even the most neatly maintained garage is going to have some oil on its floor, which is now on your socks, being tracked all over the tan Berber? Oh, God, his ass was grass. But no, celebrate good times, come on. No oil stain on rug. He tore off his socks. It was absolutely verboten for him to be in the main living area barefoot. Mom and Dad coming home to find him Tarzaning around like some sort of white trasher would not be the least fucking bit. Swearing in your head? Dad said in his head. Step up, Scout, be a man. If you want to swear aloud, swear aloud. I don't want to swear aloud. Then don't swear in your head. Mom and Dad would be heartsick if they could hear the swearing he sometimes did in his head. Such as crap, cunt, shit, turd, dick in the ear, butt creamery. Why couldn't he stop doing that? They thought so highly of him, sending weekly braggy emails to both sets of grandparents, such as, Kyle's been super busy keeping up his grades while running varsity cross country, though still a sophomore, while setting aside a little time each day to manufacture such humdingers as cunt, swoggle, rear fuck. What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he be grateful for all that Mom and Dad did for him instead of cornhole the ear cunt, flake fuck the pale vestige with a pottering dick neat? You could always clear the mind with a hard pinch on your own minimal love handle. Ouch! Hey, today was Tuesday, a major treat day. The 5 new work points for placing the geode, plus his existing 2 work points, totaled 7 work points, which, added to his 8 accrued usual chore points, made 15 total treat points, which could garner him a major treat. For example, 2 handfuls of yogurt-covered raisins, plus 20 free choice TV minutes, although the particular show would have to be negotiated with Dad at time of cash-in. One thing you will not be watching, Scout, is America's Most Outspoken Dirt Bikers. Whatever. Whatever, Dad. Oh, really, Scout? Whatever? Will it be whatever when I take away all your treat points? Force you to quit cross country, as I've several times threatened to do if a little more cheerful obedience wasn't forthcoming? No, I don't want to quit, Dad. Please, I'm good at it. You'll see. First meet. Even Matt Dre said, and who is Matt Dre? Some ape on the football team? Yes. Is his word law? No. What did he say? Little shit can run. Oh, nice talk, Scout, ape talk. Anyway, you may not make it to the first meet. Your ego seems to be overflowing its banks. And why? Because you can jog. Anyone can jog. Beasts of the field can jog. I'm not quitting, anal cock shitbird rectum Fritz. But please, I'm begging you. It's the only thing I'm decent at. Mom, if he makes me quit, I swear to God, drama doesn't suit you, beloved only. If you want the privilege of competing in a team sport, Scout, show us that you can live within our perfectly reasonable system of directives designed to benefit you. Hello? Van had just pulled up in the St. Michael's parking lot. Kyle walked in a controlled, gentlemanly manner to the kitchen counter. On the counter was Kyle's traffic log, which served the dual purpose of, 1, buttressing Dad's argument that Father Dimitri should build a soundproof retaining wall, and 2, constituting a data set for a possible science fair project for him, Kyle, entitled, by Dad, Correlation of Church Parking Lot Volume versus Day of Week, with ancillary investigation of Sunday volume throughout year. Smiling agreeably as if he enjoyed filling out the log, Kyle very legibly filled out the log. Vehicle van, color gray, make Chevy, year unknown. Guy got out of the van, one of the usual Ruskies. Ruski was an allowed slang. Also dang it. Also holy golly. Also crapper. This Ruski was wearing a jean jacket over a hoodie, which in Kyle's experience was not unusual church wear for the Ruskies, who sometimes came directly over from Jiffy Lube still wearing coveralls. Under vehicle driver, he wrote probable parishioner. That stank, rather. The guy being a stranger, Kyle, now had to stay inside until the stranger left the neighborhood, which totally futzed up his geode placing. He'd be out there until midnight. What a detriment. The guy put on a day-glow vest. Dude was a meter reader. The meter reader looked left, then right, leaped across the creek, entered the Pope backyard, passed between the soccer ball rebounder and the in-ground pool, then knocked on the Pope door. Good leap there, Boris. The door swung open. Allison. Kyle's heart was singing. He'd always thought that was just a phrase. Allison was like a national treasure. In the dictionary under beauty, there should be a picture of her in that jean skirt. Although lately, she didn't seem to like him all that much. Now she stepped across her deck so the meter reader could show her something electrical wrong on the roof. The guy seemed eager to show her. Actually, he had her by the wrist and was like tugging. That was weird, wasn't it? Well, nothing had ever been weird around here before, so probably it was fine. Probably the guy was just a really new meter reader. Somehow Kyle felt like stepping out onto the deck. He stepped out. The guy froze. Allison's eyes were scared horse eyes. The guy cleared his throat, turned slightly to let Kyle see something. A knife. The meter reader had a knife. "Hey, what you doing?" the guy said. "Standing right there until we leave. Move a muscle, I knife her in the heart. Swear to God. Got it?" Kyle's mouth was so spitless, all he could do was make his mouth do the shape it normally did when saying yes. Now they were crossing the yard. Allison threw herself to the ground. The guy hauled her up. She threw herself down. He hauled her up. It was odd seeing Allison tossed like a rag doll in the sanctuary of the perfect yard her dad had made for her. She threw herself down. The guy hissed something and she rose, suddenly docile. In his chest, Kyle felt the many directives, major and minor, he was right now violating. He was on the deck shoeless, on the deck shirtless, was outside when a stranger was near, had engaged with that stranger. Last week, Sean Ball had brought a wig to school to more effectively mimic the way Bev Murren chewed her hair when nervous. Kyle had briefly considered intervening. At evening meeting, Mom had said that she considered Kyle's decision not to intervene judicious. Dad had said, "That was none of your business. You could have been badly hurt." Mom had said, "Think of all the resources we've invested in you, beloved only." Dad said, "I know we sometimes strike you as strict, but you are literally all we have." They were at the soccer ball rebounder now. Allison's arm up behind her back. She was making this low, repetitive sound of denial, like she was trying to invent a noise that would adequately communicate her feelings about what she just this instant realized was going to happen to her. He was a kid. There was nothing he could do. In his chest, he felt the lush release of pressure that always resulted when he submitted to a directive. There at his feet was the geode. He should just look at that until they were gone. It was a great one, maybe the greatest one ever. Crystals of the cutaway glistened in the sun. It looked so nice in the yard once he'd placed it. He'd place it once they were gone. Dad would be impressed that even after what had occurred, he'd remembered to place the geode. "That's the ticket, Scout. We are well pleased, beloved only. Super job, Scout." Excuse me. Holy crap. It was happening. She was marching along all meek like the trooper he'd known she'd be. He'd had her in mind since the baptism of what's-his-name, Sergei's kid, at the Russian church. She'd been standing out in her yard, her dad or some such taking her picture. He'd been like, "Hello, Betty." Kenny'd been like, "Little young, bro." He'd been like, "For you, Grandpa." When you studied history, the history of cultures, you saw your own individual time as hidebound. There were various theories of acquiescence. In Bible days, a king might ride through a field and go, "That one." And she would be brought unto him. And they would duly be betrothed. And if she gave birth unto a son, super, bring out the streamer. She was a keeper. Was she that first night digging it? Probably not. Was she shaking like a leaf? Didn't matter. What mattered was offspring and the furtherance of the lineage, plus the exaltation of the king, which resulted in righteous kingly power. Here was the creek. He marched her right through. The following bullet points remained in the decision matrix. Take to side van door, shove in, follow in, tape wrist mouth, hook the chain, make speech. He had the speech down cold. I practiced it both in his head and on the tape recorder. "Calm your heart, darling. I know you're scared because you don't know me yet and didn't expect us today, but give me a chance and you will see we will fly high. See, I'm putting the knife right over here and I don't expect I'll have to use it, right? If she wouldn't get in the van, punch hard in gut. Then pick up, carry to side van door, throw in, tape wrist mouth, hook the chain, make speech, etc., etc. Stop, pause, he said. Gal stopped. Fuck's sake. Side door of the van was locked. How undisciplined was that? Ensuring that the van door was unlocked was clearly indicated on the pre-mission matrix. Melvin appeared in his mind. On Melvin's face was a look of hot disappointment that had always preceded an ass-whooping, which had always preceded the other thing. Put up your hands, Melvin said. Defend yourself. True, a little error there. Should have double-checked the pre-mission matrix. No biggie. Joy, not fear. Melvin was dead 15 years. Mom dead 12. Little bitch was turned around now, looking back at the house. That willfulness would not stand. That was going to get nipped in the bud. He'd have to remember to hurt her early, establish a baseline. Turn the fuck around, he said. Gal turned around. He unlocked the door, swung it open, moment of truth. If she got in, let him use the tape, they were home free. He picked out this place out by Sackett, big-ass cornfield, dirt road leading in. If fuck-wise it went good, they'd pick up the freeway from there, basically steal the van. It was Kenny's van. He borrowed it for the day. Screw Kenny. Kenny had once called him stupid. Too bad, Kenny. Every mark just cost you one van. If fuck-wise it went bad, and she didn't properly arouse him, he'd abort the activity. Truncate the subject. Heave the thing out, clean van as necessary, go buy corn. Return van to Kenny. Say, hey bro, here's a shitload of corn, thanks for the van. I never could have bought a suitable quantity of corn in just my car. Then lay low, watch the papers like he'd done with the non-arousing redhead out, and Gal gave him this imploring look like, please don't. Was this a good time to give her one in the gut, knock the wind out of her sails? It was. He did. The geode was beautiful. What a beautiful geode. What made it beautiful? What were the principal characteristics of a beautiful geode? Come on, think. Come on, concentrate. She'll recover in time, beloved only. Oh, none of our affair, Scout. We're amazed by your good judgment, beloved only. Dimly now, he noted that Allison had been punched. Eyes on the geode, he heard the little oof. His heart dropped at the thought of what he was letting happen. They'd used goldfish snacks as coins. They'd made bridges out of rocks down by the creek back in the day. Oh, God. He should have never stepped outside. Once they were gone, he'd just go back inside, pretend he'd never stepped out. Make the model railroad town. Still be making it when Mom and Dad got home. When eventually someone told him about it, he'd make a certain face. Already on his face, he could feel the face he would make, like, what, Allison, raped, killed, oh God. Raped and killed while I innocently made my railroad town, sitting cross-legged and unaware on the floor like a tiny little... No. They'd be gone soon enough. Then he could just go inside. Maybe call 911. Although then everyone would know he'd done nothing. All his future life would be bad. Forever, he'd be the guy who'd done nothing. And calling wouldn't do any good. They'd be long gone. The parkway was just across Featherstone with like a million arteries and clover leaves or whatever sprouting out of it. So that was that. In he'd go as soon as they left. Leave, he thought, so I can go inside and forget this ever. And then he found himself running across the lawn. Oh, God. What was he doing? Jesus, shit, the directives he was violating. Running in the yard, bad for the sod. Transporting a geode without the protective wrapping. Hopping the fence, which stressed the fence, which would cost a pretty penny. Leaving the yard barefoot. Entering the secondary area without permission. Entering the creek barefoot, broken glass, dangerous microorganisms. And not only that, oh God, suddenly he saw what this giddy part of himself intended, which was to violate a directive so major and absolute that it wasn't even a directive. Since you didn't need a directive to know how totally verboten it was. He burst out of the creek, the guy still not turning, and let the geode fly into the guy's head, which seemed to emit a weird edge seep of blood, even before the skull visibly indented, and the guy sat right on his ass. Yes! Score! It was fun! Fun dominating a grown-up. Fun using the most dazzling gazelle-like leg speed ever seen in the history of mankind to dash soundlessly across space and master this huge galoot who otherwise right now would... What if he hadn't? Jesus, what if he hadn't? He imagined this guy bending Allison in two like a pale garment bag while pulling her hair and thrusting bluntly as he, Kyle, sat cowed and obedient, tiny railroad viaduct, grasping his pathetic baby... Jesus! He skipped over and hurled the geode right through the windshield of the van, which imploded, producing an inward rain of glass shards that made the sound of thousands of tiny bamboo wind chimes. He scrambled up the hood of the van, retrieved the geode. Really? Really? You were going to ruin her life, ruin my life, you cunt probe, dick munch, ass gashing ant. Who's bossing who now? Gash ass? Jizz lips, turd munch? He'd never felt so strong, angry, wild. Who's the man? Who's your daddy? What else must he do to ensure the animal did no further harm? You still moving, freak? Got a plan, stroke dick? Want a skull gash on top of your existing skull gash, big man? You think I won't? You think I... Oh, easy, Scout. You're out of control. Slow your motor down, beloved homie. Quiet. I'm the boss of me. Excuse me. Fuck. What the hell? What was he doing on the ground? Had he tripped? Did someone wonk him? Did a branch fall? God damn. He touched his head. His hand came away bloody. The beanpole kid was bending to pick something up, a rock. Why was that kid off his porch? Where was the knife? Where was the gal? Crab crawling towards a creek, flying across a yard, now going into her house. Fuck it, everything was fucked. I better hit the road. With what, his good looks? He had like $8 total. Ah, Christ, now the kid had smashed the windshield with a rock. Kenny was not gonna like that one bit. He tried to stand but couldn't. The blood was just pouring out. Well, he was not going to jail again. No way. He'd slit his wrists. Where was the knife? That had nobility. Then the people would finally know his name. Which of them had had the balls to samurai themselves with a knife in the chest? None. Nobody. Go ahead, pussy. Do it. No. The king does not take his own life. The superior man silently accepts the mindless rebuke of the rabble. Waits to rise and fight anew. Plus, he had no idea where the knife even was. Well, he didn't need it. He'd crawl into the woods, kill something with his bare hands, or make a trap from some grass. Was he gonna barf? Yeah, there he had, right on his lap. Figures you'd blow the simplest thing, Melvin said. Melvin, God, can't you see my head is bleeding so bad? A kid did it to you. You're a joke. You got fucked by a kid. Oh, sirens. Perfect. Well, it was going to be a sad day for the cops. He'd fight him hand to hand. He'd sit until the last moment, watching them draw in, doing a silent death mantra that would centralize all his life power in his fists. He sat thinking about his fists. They were huge granite boulders. They were a pit bull each. He tried to get up. Somehow his legs weren't working. He hoped the cops would get here soon. His head really hurt. When he touched up there, things moved. It was like he was wearing a gore cap. He was going to need a bunch of stitches. He hoped it wouldn't hurt too much. Probably it would, though. Where was that beanpole kid? Oh, here he was, looming over him, blocking out the sun, rock held high, yelling something, but he couldn't tell what because of the ringing in his ears. Then he saw that the kid was going to bring the rock down. He closed his eyes and waited and was not at peace at all, but instead felt the beginnings of a terrible dread welling up inside him. And if that dread kept growing at the current rate, he realized in a flash of insight there was a name for the place he would be then, and it was hell. Allison stood at the kitchen window. She'd peed herself, which was fine. People did that, went super scared. She first noticed it while making the call. Her hands had been shaking so bad. They still were. One leg was doing that thumper thing. God, the things that guy had said to her. He'd punched her. He'd pinched her. The mark on her arm was black. How could Kyle still be out there? But there he was, in those comical shorts. So confident he was goofing around, hands clenched over his head like a boxer from some cute alt universe where a kid that skinny could actually win a fight against a guy with a knife. Wait. Oh, his hands weren't clenched. He was holding that rock, shouting something down at the guy who was on his knees, like the blindfolded Chinese fellow in that video they'd seen in history, about to get sword killed by a formal dude in a helmet. Kyle, don't, she whispered. For months afterward, she had nightmares in which Kyle brought the rock down. She was on the deck, trying to scream his name, but nothing was coming out. Down came the rock. Then the guy had no head. The blow just literally dissolved his head. And his body thumped over, and Kyle turned to her with this heartbroken look of, my life is over. I just killed a guy. Why was it she sometimes wondered that in dreams we can't do the simplest things, like a crying puppy is standing on some broken glass, and you want to pick it up and brush the shards off its pads, but you can't because you're balancing a ball on your head? Or you're driving, and there's this old guy on crutches, and you go to Mr. Fader, your driver's ed instructor, should I swerve? And he's like, probably. But then you hear this big clunk, And Fader makes a negative mark in his book. Sometimes she'd wake up crying from that dream about Kyle. The last time, Mom and Dad were already there going, that's not how it was. Remember, Allie? How did it happen? Say it. Say it out loud. Allie, can you tell Mommy and Daddy how it really happened? I ran outside, she said. I shouted. That's right, Dad said. You shouted. Shouted like a champ. And what did Kyle do, Mom said? Put down the rock, she said. A bad thing happened to you kids, Dad said. But it could have been worse. So much worse, Mom said. But because of you kids, Dad said, it wasn't. You did so good, Mom said. Did beautiful, Dad said. Thanks. Thank you. Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And now I think we have some time for questions. If you would like to ask me any, I'm happy to answer them. This is funny. I do a lot of these, and I noticed that the first question is always from the most sexually energetic person in the room. I don't know. It's like this weird, like Darwinian thing or something. I don't know why. I do not want Richmond to be the only place where that shtick didn't work. And I have to go and say, there's no sexually energetic people in Richmond, not even one. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It's not a question, but I really like that story.
Thank you.
And it's really, ultimately, it's just so sweet and affirmative.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because, you write these things in the privacy of your own home, and you're kind of following the logic that the story has. And that one was so scary to write in a way, and scary to read. Yeah, because it's dark, and as I was writing it, I was really hoping it would turn out nicely, and luckily it did. But like we talked in class today, if the energy of a story, if it takes you in a certain way, you kind of have to go there. So if it had a bad ending, I probably would have had to go with it. But luckily, it didn't.
Yeah, but Tom Robbins made a comment one time about if you always write about the terrible things that are happening, how is anything good ever going to happen?
Yeah. There's a tradition of this kind of story. I was thinking of Joyce Carol Oates has Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Yeah. And then there's the Flannery O'Connor story, A Good Man Is Hard to Find. And there's one that John Barth wrote, which is a really amazing story. I think it's called the story, The End of the Story or something. But there's kind of a lineage of abduction stories. So I thought maybe, in a way, it became an aesthetic thing where to let him win would be a little bit too simple in a certain way, But this story came out of, I have daughters, and in one period in Syracuse, two things happened. One was our daughter, who had just come back from Peru, and she came back with this great insight. She said, I think that if you bring your best self to people and believe the best about them, they'll respond with positive energy, which I believe. But as a father, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. And then she was down at a bagel shop, and these two or three guys, a little older than her, she was 17, they were like 25, kind of surrounded her car. And one of the guys said what you don't ever want to hear, which is, we're not going to hurt you. Oh, okay. And so her conditioning, I think, because they were older guys, and I think her conditioning would have been to sort of trust them, but instead she hit the gas and almost hit the one guy and drove off. So that was one good thing. And then the same week, her friend had just gotten her license and was driving and got lost. And out of nowhere, this middle-aged, creepy-looking guy just jumped in the car next to her and said, drive. And, now every parent has always told their kid, a car is, 2,500 pounds of potential death, so you take it very seriously. Don't ever let the vehicle be out of your control. And she just did this kind of insect thing where her legs came up. Whoa! And the car rolled into the car in front, and the guy freaked out and ran away. So I was thinking about, that as a parent, you're always trying to, think of every possible situation, give the best advice, but of course at the moment of truth, we're on our own, and your native good sense hopefully will win out. So yeah, thanks for the question. Sir.
I'd like to know who are some of your favorite writers, contemporary or otherwise.
I like, who I go back to again and again is Ben Marcus. For some reason, his early books, his first two books, whenever I read them, I get excited about writing, just because the language is so weird. Tobias Wolff was my teacher at Syracuse, and he's a guy I just worship on every possible level. I think Alice Munro can't be beat as a short story writer. There's so many. I mean, Yeah, kind of the usual suspects. I mean, I also read a lot of the Russians, the old Russians, Gogol and Isaac Babel and Daniel Karms and those guys to kind of, you know. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
How did you choose those ballet terms, just out of curiosity?
My wife is a ballet dancer.
Sure.
Oh.
How are they?
Do they make sense? Do you know? Yeah.
Were they random, or did you specifically choose those steps?
I was kind of picturing something you would actually do, you know. I mean, not that I would know, but when I was a kid in Chicago, this is where we get to the too much information part of the evening. But I would always pretend to play hockey in the house, like, you know, in your socks. And I remember how like the whole house sort of had a layout, very specific. You could do certain things in certain places. So I just kind of took that thought loop and projected it onto a young girl. And then I ran it by my wife. I said, could she do this, this, and this? And she goes, yeah, she could. So, yeah. Yes.
When you were talking about following the direction of the story and wanting it to go one way, but just following the way it went, can you talk about that a little bit, like how you know when it's...
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I'm sure for everyone it's different, but for me, it's we talked in class today. It's kind of what I try to do is keep myself honest by reading a fresh draft every day, and then really just imagine that there's a little meter in my head, a needle. Like this is positive and this is negative. And as you're reading, just honestly, you know, this is hard, but to read uninflectedly and just say, if I didn't have so much invested in this story, what would I really think of it? Would I, you know, feel physically drawn into it? Would I be laughing? Would I be kind of building up a little bit of resistance? You know, and that's kind of how I write. I just read and then edit with that in mind. So if a place gets slow, it's cuts. In this case, it was mostly just about the fact that the easy solution. You know, you stack the deck when you're writing a story. You know, you say a big hippopotamus was perched above Frank with a thin piece of dental floss, and then there was an earthquake. All right, well, so if the hippopotamus falls, that's one story, but that's kind of a lower level story maybe than the next one kind of. So this one, I was just following the energy of the logic I was setting up. Here's this guy, this brutal guy, these two sweet kids. Is there any way this kid could possibly get out of it? And for me, it's kind of comical, but the process is to try a bunch of different ways of escaping. And so at one point, because he's a jogger, I had this kind of idea that, okay, he's going to taunt the guy and run. And the guy's going to stumble after him like a caveman, and he's going to run a little further. And I had drafts like where it almost worked, but then you kind of thought, you know, I don't think so. So it was mostly just a matter of trying to get it to work out in a way that kind of didn't make me cringe, I guess. If that's you had a question?
This is sort of a question for a guy who's seen his stuff in print for a while. I know when you publish a book and it's just your stuff in the book, you have a little bit more control as to how things are arranged, how things are presented. But you were reading from a magazine this evening, right? And I was wondering, what is it when you see a story, it's not your first story, it's not even your 10th, just written, typed out by someone else, put someplace you and them control, and do you feel that same sense of ownership to it?
Oh, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing how much it still is pleasurable at this point in my life. And I work with the New Yorker really closely, and they are so great about, Deborah Treisman is the editor, and she's got this incredible way of, in this very zen way, quietly urging you up to higher ground. So in this one, we did a lot of cuts and a lot of tightening of the language, and then that tightening led to this kind of last 2 or 3 days of real intense work where that whole thing about him lifting the rock came out of the woodwork and stuff. So I like it. I don't have anything but happy feelings when it comes out. And yeah, I have 2 college tuitions to pay too, so there's kind of an extra thrill to it. Yes.
Where did you start when you started writing that story? Did you start with like the idea or the characters?
Oh, good question. I actually, this will be, there's a Chekhov story called, I think it's called After the Theater or After the Ball or something like that. It's a real short piece about this young girl who goes, I think she goes to a play, and she comes home and she's just sitting in her room like this girl, and she's kind of thinking about the different boys she saw and her future and everything. And because Chekhov is so great, it's just perfectly contained. Nothing happens except she thinks. And you can kind of see the seed of the woman she's going to become. And so I always thought it would be fun to try something like that and to try to write something that was sweet. Well, because of my limitations, then suddenly an abductor shows up, you know. But that was the start of it. And then I don't really remember, but once I started, I know these incidents about my daughter and her friend were sort of in my mind. And other than that, it just started with trying to make a teenage voice that was kind of fun, and it would kind of sustain itself. And often, what I find is if you do that, if you can effectively mimic a person thinking, plot will come right out of that, right? Like she's in her house. Well, in order for plot to happen, somebody has to show up. And I don't really remember why it was that guy, but as soon as he was there, it's like, oh, okay, we're off to the races. So I tend to start with the smallest thing I can and not overthink it too much, and hope that it'll just kind of grow on its own, like a seed crystal in biology class a little bit. Oh, yes.
Do you ever have a difficult time writing female characters?
What's funny is I don't really think about gender too much, and as you can tell, I don't really. I guess I don't think that you have to really identify with the person exactly. My theory, this is a little bit corny, but I think that everybody has some version of everybody inside them. So if you wanted to write a story about a 97-year-old man, you could do it. Why? Well, because you have an inner 97-year-old man. You've been tired. Maybe your knee hurt once. Maybe you once read about constipation or something. So in a certain way, writing is a very hopeful, empathetic act, because in writing about anybody, you're saying, well, even though we're different, there must be some commonality. And if I surrender to it, I might be able to effectively imagine some alternate human being. So I don't really get too hung up on gender, or like writing this rapist was not a picnic, But in a certain way, you just say, well, we're making a puppet show. It's you're not really sawing the woman in half. You're just trying to appear to do that. If that answers.
So I just, your whole thing about creating a female voice and that teenage voice, first of all, spot on. I have a 16-year-old sister, sounds exactly like that. But the Kyle character, the parents are just so over the top and crazy. I'm just wondering if you have personal experience.
No, actually, my parents are the opposite. They're so sweet and hands off. But I have an inner set of parents like that. Me, because we, we had never had kids before, and suddenly it's like, don't walk on that tile. It's probably slippery, So in a way, in the same way, like with this girl, the Allison girl, really she's me at 15. I didn't know how to change the oil. I had no fucking idea. And I knew it had something to do with the hood, and I would go, well, let me check this out tomorrow. And I couldn't figure out it. So it's just really, I think you kind of look to yourself, and if you don't mind telling some secrets on yourself, it's amazing what, the different kind of things you can come up with. But my parents were terrific, but you can always look within to find some funny defect, I think. Yes, in the back.
I love the different voices of each character. Did you go into writing it thinking that you were going to use each voice, or were you going to just do it like the third person?
I like that idea of that third-person ventriloquist. I didn't have any idea that there'd be so many, for sure. But you start writing, and in this case, I was thinking about how do we really think, and at least for me, maybe I'm the only one. There's a whole chorus of mostly authority figures, nuns, from 1968. Thank you, and I think if you were being really honest and scientific about your thought process, that would be accurate. That you're always hearing these little nagging voices. So. And then as I'm writing, I kind of do a thing. It's like it's sort of at the back of your throat. It's weird, but it's a voice imagination thing in the back of your throat where you can kind of imagine yourself doing those voices. So I indulge that if I get to a certain place. And then when it's time to read it publicly, you have to kind of tweak it a little bit and maybe exaggerate them or not do the voice you have in your mind quite good enough because you don't. But when I was in grade school, we had a basketball team in Chicago. And a friend and I were not very good, so we were kind of like the end sitters. And we thought we had this whole mythology about the other teams where we'd see them over and over, and we'd make up backstories for them, and do voices, and we had imagined home scenarios. We'd write little descriptions. So we had a great time. But then we made a mistake, which is we came out with it. And at one of the games, there was this team from St. Lawrence. It was all these big. Somehow they had body hair. I don't know how they managed that. So we had names. So one of them was, whenever this poor guy would come out, my friend and I would go, "Hero of the beach." And he'd look at us, and we had a whole voices for everybody. And so for a while, we thought that was pretty cool. But then the coach of our team, his son actually pulled us aside and said, "You guys are really embarrassing us and yourselves." But it's that same energy, like just, yeah. Sir.
Before you got your MA, and you talked about nuns, obviously from earlier in your childhood. At what point did you begin to write, or what I'm asking is, was your writing always more of a hobby or something you did for joy, or did it ever become if it did it become a disciplined process? And obviously you weren't an English major, so I mean, I'm just curious at what point did you transition into identifying yourself more as an accomplished writer rather than a geophysicist? Or
it was really late. I had this, you were talking today in class, I had this young writer thing, which is I wanted it so much. And I identified myself as a writer so much that I didn't want to actually do it. Because if I did it, I might fail, and then what, you know? So I did a lot of thinking about the kind of books I would write, and a lot of lifestyle emulation of different, you know, Kerouac and Hemingway. And then really, I did it, and I waited until, honestly, maybe, I think I was 27, and I was in a roofing job, and at some point I went, you know, you're kind of full of shit. You're not writing, you're just talking about it. And people would say, what are you working on? I'd say, oh, writing, you know. And so luckily I had these really good friends who were former high school teachers, and I think they smelled a fraud about me a little bit. Or, you know, that I could easily become somebody who intended to. And they said, you know what, why don't you quit your roofing job and live in our attic for 3 months, rent-free. And they kind of called my bluff, you know. And so I did, and I went up there, and I didn't write anything good, but it was, like you said, a discipline of going up there and saying, well, God, they bought me all this food. I'll go up and work from 8 until they come home at 4. And I did it faithfully. And that was the very first time that I thought, oh, okay, if they think of me this way, then maybe I am, you know. So, yeah. But late is fine. You know, we were talking today, Walker Percy was 50 before he wrote a book, so what's the rush, you know? Yeah.
Somebody else already asked the question I had, which was whether you identified with Kyle. So I just want to tell you why I had that question, because it struck me as a parent that it was sort of like this parental fantasy, like you could give your kid this really incredibly rigid, probably more than any of us are ever used to, structure, but then at the critical moment, he knows when to transcend this, when the context has changed and it no longer applies. And it just struck me that you were talking about sort of doing it as an exercise, like this sort of self-contained girl just in her own head, but then, you know, you broke out of that and something actually happened and then you took it, and it just struck me that you know, that's interesting to me, the idea of doing something as an exercise, but then you know when to, you know, bring it out and make it something a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that was really the feeling. And you know, it's funny, in writing, again, in class we talked a little bit, Flannery O'Connor said, you can choose what you write about, but you can't choose what you make live. Now that sounds nice, but in reality it's often, for me, a cringy moment. Like I was in that mode of writing this nice story about a girl, thought she was kind of sweet, I was enjoying it, but it was kind of flatlining in terms of action. And I don't have a lot of subtlety, so the only thing I know how to do is violence. For some reason, you know, I mean, I don't like it particularly. Or if I want, you know, somebody to empathize with the character, I give the character a physical deformity, really subtle, you know. But for some reason, but then at that point, I thought, oh God, I'm doing it again. But I was also, it just felt like the energy was coming up. Like that was undeniable. Suddenly, it was interesting. I didn't really know what was going to happen to her. So you kind of go, you know, this writing thing is sort of like you want to be writer A. You want to be Chekhov, if you're me. And you take the talent that is your dog that is your talent and say, boy, go fetch me a beautiful classic short story. I'll be waiting here. And the dog trots off, you know, and you're waiting, and it comes back with like the lower half of a Barbie doll. You're like, what? This is not. And then you send him again, and he brings another one, and you start to realize that that's your deal, you know. So you got to kind of take the power where you get it, even though actually it's sort of heartbreaking in a way. You know, you have to sort of say, well, I'm not Chekhov 2, but that would be kind of a shitty thing to be anyway. Let's just be me 1, even though it's quite less, you know. So.
I find it interesting that you chose to give an ending with Allison instead of Kyle. And I know it's looking in your head because the transformation really occurs with Kyle there. And so I was really wondering why you chose to give us the ending with Allison, and what do you think would happen with Kyle?
That's a great question. I actually had an ending with Kyle where he is talking to his parents. And what do you think happens? Exactly what you think. You're a good little man, Scout. From now on, you can drive the car, you know, whatever. And so in a way, there's a principle that I heard beautifully articulated by Rivka Galkin, this really wonderful young writer. She said, if the reader posits a certain motion, you don't have to do it because you already got it. Right? So I think most of us, I don't know, but I mean, certainly there's a curiosity. Either his parents are going to rise to the occasion and see that they've been manhandling this kid, or they're not. But either way, we kind of know that as a beat. So that scene had that feeling like, yeah, we know that. So I was kind of just looking around for some way to get out of that. And the other thing was, I had to resolve whether or not he brought that rock down, and somehow doing it in his head wasn't very interesting. And the third thing that was working, and this is all in 2 days before we closed the piece, was that I really loved this Allison girl, and I hated that she was just rescued, you know. It seemed like, yeah, it made an imbalance. Like, she's so important at the beginning. So I thought, is there any way that she can participate? And as soon as he had that rock over his head, I thought, yeah, she's got to save him too, you know. So it's not nearly as rational as I'm making it out to be, and I tried a bunch of different things. But in these kind of things, the shift is often, if I had 3 hours, it's often structural rather than conceptual. It's like, nothing, the other two characters didn't have anything to say at that point, so you kind of turn to him. Good question. Yeah, sir.
I've mentioned the Russians several times tonight in the talk. Your story mentions the Orthodox Church, and the overall story echoes of Dostoevsky. Is Russian a big influence on your writing?
Yeah, I love them. I love them more than American writers, and I don't really know why. From the time I was in college, I picked up something by Tolstoy, and I just loved it. And I think it's that, at least for my money, they are not shy about taking on the big questions, you know, love and death and lust and evil and good. And that maybe as a former, you know, Catholic altar boy, that appeals to me. But I love the way they just step up to the plate, and they don't really care about relationships, except with God or Satan, you know. And so yeah, I've been there a couple of times, and maybe I'm a reincarnated serf or something. I hope. I'd like to think so. Yes.
When do you know when to scrap something to work with?
Yeah.
It's got no legs. It's got nothing.
I don't know. No, I mean, no. I'll tell you one. I don't know the answer. I think my experience has been early on, you do that a lot more than later. And now what I'll do is I was saying today, I have a story I've been working on since 1998. And if I could fast forward through it, I really have, the first 15 pages haven't changed a bit, and the next whatever have been written over probably 100 times. That's not good. But sometimes it is. Like for me now, I almost never scrap anything. I just keep thinking, okay, whatever is causing me to block up is the key to the solution. I'll get it. But early, I scrapped a lot of things. So it kind of depends on you, and you're asking the right question for sure. You know, I would say most people probably err on the side of scrapping it too early. You know, I see a lot of teaching at Syracuse. I see a lot of times the metaphor I think of is the writer brings a pot of water and puts it on the stove and turns on the fire. And what has to happen, what we pay for in all different kinds of currency is boilage. We want rising action. And that's really hard. And every person has to figure out rising action on their own. So often what young writers do, and I did it to no end, is you turn the water on and you go, that shit's not boiling. Let me get a different stove. Let me get an experimental stove, you know, or I'm going to use a second-person stove. And so all you do, or I just realized I need a flashback. I need a spaceship, you know. So what happens is you're just kind of moving the same water around to all these different stoves, and you never do that really backbreaking work of saying, okay, dude, how do you get your action to rise, you know? And so, you know, you can't pin me down. I'm a moving target. Yes, ma'am. I did.
And I was wondering, was there a children's book that you had read that made you want to write a children's book, like a favorite of yours? Or?
You know, when I was a kid, I didn't read, we didn't read a lot of kids' books, but then when I had my daughters, we went through the pantheon, you know, all those great books. And I don't think it was one particular one, but I loved maybe it's just emotional from reading to them, but the idea of a simple text and a beautiful picture. So Seuss was a big thing. I love that book, The Little House. I think that's just, you know that one? Yeah, you know. And Pokey Little Puppy is a classic. I think it was written by a Russian. I'm not sure. No, my daughters, I would always tell them stories. And for me, it was such a relief because I'm such an OCD, obsessive rewriter. And to go into the room and just say, I'm making this up. And if they're interested, I win. And if they go to sleep, I kind of lose, you know. And, yeah. Do you write kids' books yourself?
No, actually, that question, my sister is a huge fan of yours. She's read everything I think you've ever had published, and she wanted you to ask.
We'll tell her. That book is out of print, unfortunately, so which is sad. Yeah. Not to end on a bummer, but anyway. But thank you so much for your attention. You're a great artist. I appreciate it.